Hey guys, make sure to like and subscribe, any support from y'all is appreciated. If you want me to post a specific manga or novel, leave a comment and I'll try my best. If the video is too fast or slow for your liking, then you can adjust it in the right corner of the video. My current goal is to hit 500 subscribers. What is she doing here? Why is she talking to me? Although Sunny was panicking on the inside, none of the emotions reflected on his face. Armed with the extensive experience of deceit, manipulation, and facing terrifying nightmare creatures in melee, he kept a straight face, threw a dark look at Rain, and calmly said, "I am not staring at anything. And who are you calling a brat, you brat? Respect your elders." The girl scoffed. "What elders? You're obviously younger than me." Sunny opened his eyes wide in outrage. Ouch. He knew that he looked younger than his age, but to be mistaken for a middle schooler. That was just too much. It was getting dark, so maybe that was the reason for her mistake. Rain, meanwhile, was not done speaking. "And you were definitely staring at me, with a very nasty expression. I almost tripped. Didn't your parents teach you not to stare?" Sunny opened his mouth, then closed it again. Then opened it once more. "First of all, I am 18. Second, I was just zoning out and thinking about stuff. Adult stuff that a youngster like you would not even understand. And lastly, my parents taught me all they needed to teach me, but what do they have to do with any of this? They're not here." Rain mockingly raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? You live in this big house all alone?" Sunny furrowed his brow. "Not only do I live in this house alone, I also own it." But right at that moment, Effie suddenly shouted from inside, "Sunny! Come eat, dinner is getting cold." He froze, then felt the tips of his ears growing hot. "Damn it, Effie, that's a guest of mine. She's staying over." For reasons. Rain stared at him for a few moments with a funny expression on her face, then asked, "Your name is Sunny?" Sunny shrugged, trying to appear as indifferent as possible. "Sure. Why?" She suddenly laughed. "What's so funny?" No. It's just. My mom calls me Rainy. What a coincidence." He relaxed. "Oh. For a moment, I was afraid that she remembers me. But it doesn't seem that way." "Good. That is good." Was he a little bit disappointed? Sunny took out his communicator, pressed a button on it, and threw an etched chip that slid from the slick device to Rain. She was in process of asking another question. "Oh, and by the way, I often see you meandering on the porch and skipping school. Are you a delinquent or WH?" Then, she caught the chip and stared at it in confusion. What's this?" Sunny smiled with a corner of his mouth. "Can't you see? That's a government-issued citizenship chip. Now how would I have one if I wasn't of legal age?" Rain looked at the chip, then grew even paler than usual. You really are 18? She was so mortified that she even used the proper honorifics. Sunny laughed. "Of course I am. As a respectable adult, I never lie. I am the most honest person in the world, really." The girl seemed like she was currently wishing to sink into the earth. "Oh. I am so sorry, then. I didn't think." As a child that grew up in a good family, she was most likely taught to be very polite to elders, so this situation was more or less a nightmare. Sunny himself had never associated with types of people who were particular about etiquette, but from what he had seen in Rain's school, among her ilk, social hierarchy and proper rituals were all the rage. Luckily, Effie decided to appear at that very moment to put an end to the awkward situation. Opening the door, she rolled her wheelchair onto the porch while saying angrily, "Listen, doofus, are you going to eat or not? Because if not, I'll eat your portion too, you know." Then, she stopped and stared at Rain, then at Sunny. After a few moments, she asked, "Who's your friend?" Sunny rubbed his face. "Eat as much as you want, and this girl lives in the neighborhood. She was just passing by." Rain nodded. "Nice to meet you, ma'am. I am very sorry. I was just on my way home from school, and made a mistake. You see, what has happened?" Effie grinned, then gestured for her to stop talking. "Let me guess. This one right here was zoning out with a nasty expression on his face, and then looked at you and said something wildly inappropriate?" Rain blinked a couple of times, then said, "Yes. I mean, no. He didn't say anything. It was me. I said something inappropriate." The former huntress shook her head. "Then you're lucky. Sunny here is a bit special. One of a kind. The things that sometimes come out of his mouth." Sunny stared at her in outrage and hissed, "The things that come out of my mouth? You're the one to talk." She sighed, then looked at Rain with a hurt expression on her face. "You see how he bullies me? That's no way to treat a guest, Sunny. So ungracious. What will this nice neighborhood kid even think?" Rain energetically shook her head. No. I won't think anything. I have to go home, actually. It's been nice meeting you." With that, she hurriedly turned around and made a step to walk away. Effie raised her voice a little. "Bye. Nice meeting you, too. If you feel guilty about the misunderstanding, You can stop by any time. With food, all will be forgiven. Sunny stared at her with wide eyes, not quite believing what he was hearing. Finally, when Rain's figure disappeared behind the green fence, Effie turned to him and smiled. It's almost like there's a factory somewhere in the city releasing whole batches of tiny, pale, bony teenagers. That girl is almost as pale as you, Sunny. I can't believe it. With that, she shook her head, turned her wheelchair, and went back inside to continue her dinner, leaving Sunny alone, flabbergasted and trying to determine if he was currently awake. What was that? What just happened? Of all the countless scenarios he had in his head of how his first meeting with Rain would go, this was definitely not one of them. Sunny was too shaken by what had just happened to do anything else today. So, he just went down to the basement, entered the dream realm, and remained in his small room in the sanctuary instead of going out to fight nightmare creatures. There, he just slept peacefully for the entire night. This was a very strange way to act for Sunny, but many awakened did just that every day. Unless their citadel was under attack, which happened frequently in most parts of the dream realm, or they were assigned a certain duty, people just remained in their quarters, slept, and returned to the real world without throwing themselves into any kind of danger. Others performed various tasks to earn a livelihood in the citadel, all the while staying safe behind its walls. Few frequently ventured outside and challenged the wilderness of the dream realm. And who could blame them? Most people were made awakened against their will, after all. It was the spell that wanted humans to risk their lives, go through deadly trials and endure terrible suffering, not people themselves. So there was nothing wrong with a person who wanted to stay as safe as possible, for as long as possible. If anything, it was Sunny who behaved abnormally. In any case, he felt refreshed and more balanced when he returned to the real world in the morning. A good night of sleep helped him put his unexpected encounter with Rain in perspective. Yes, it was an unfortunate mistake on his part, and yes, the fact that she now knew his face and name was less than ideal. But truly, nothing too bad had happened. Rain just thought of him as a neighbor, not even an acquaintance, just a stranger, which was just as Sunny wanted it. To be on the safe side, he could avoid leaving the house for a while, altogether. And yet, in the evening, he found himself sitting on the porch again, enjoying the view and a cup of tea, as he had already grown used to. After yesterday, I doubt that she'll ever want to approach this house again. So I should be alright. But as it turned out, he was not. Sunny noticed Rain walking from the public transport terminal long before she came anywhere near his home, because one of his shadows was stationed further down the street to keep a lookout. He sighed, then lowered his eyes and pretended to study the synthwood surface of the porch, hoping to avoid making eye contact with the teenage girl. This time, he was not going to give her a reason to come closer and talk to him. However, it was all for naught. When Rain approached the path leading to his door, she slowed down a bit, hesitated, then turned and walked directly to him. What the hell? Sunny raised his head and stared at her with a bit of surprise. Hi, it's you again. She nodded, then took off her backpack and produced a big food container out of it, seemingly full of something delicious. Then, Rain handed it to Sunny. Here. My mom made it. Your friend said to bring food, right? Oh. And I'm really sorry. Yesterday. Sunny blinked a couple of times, then took the container from her hands and stared at it for a bit. Damn Effie. Who told her to ask for food? I cook great food for the both of us myself. Then, he pretended to smile and said, yeah, she did. And no problem. Say thanks to your mom. Sunny thought that the conversation would be over after that, but Rain lingered. There was a sort of curious expression on her face. It's nothing much, just some pasta with mushrooms and cream sauce. My favorite. Sunny, right? I'm Rain, by the way. He looked at the food container again, re-evaluating his stance on its existence. Nothing special, huh? He was willing to bet that the ingredients she listed were all natural, too. A far cry from synth-paced people like him usually consume to keep their bellies full in the outskirts. Sunny knew a few guys who would kill to eat something like this. His smile became more genuine. Yep, I'm Sunny. Nice to meet you, Rain. She smiled slightly, hesitated for a few moments, and then asked, so you're really 18? And live alone in your own house? I mean, with that nice friend of yours? Sunny shrugged. Sure. She's just staying over until she finds a place of her own, though. Why? The girl looked at him with wide eyes. I mean, aren't you a bit young to live on your own? Aren't your parents worried? He stared at her for a couple of seconds, then tilted his head a little. I think that I'm of a perfect age to live on my own. And no, my parents aren't worried about me one bit. Rain smiled, as though hearing the most fascinating thing ever. But, who cooks your food? No, wait. Who buys your wood? Do you get an allowance? Or do you have a stipend from your university? Wait. Do you even go to a university? I have so many questions. Sunny mentally groaned. Questions. I hate questions. Outwardly, though, he remained calm. What kind of questions are those? Obviously, I buy and cook my food myself. And who needs a university? A stipend? I am a wildly successful young entrepreneur, if you must know. Basically, I do whatever I want. Rain stared at him. And your parent just let you? They're not lecturing you every day about the future, the importance of having a productive career, and how you must be always ready in case you get infected by the spell. Sonny furrowed his brow. No, none of those. Rain looked at him with envy and sighed. You're lucky. My mom and dad are like hawks. ... What the hell is a hawk? Something bad, I presume. He remained silent for a while, a complicated expression appearing on his face. Finally, Sonny said, don't be hard on your mom and dad. You're the lucky one, really. I sort of twisted the truth a little. My parents don't care about where I am and what I do. Because I don't have parents. So, I would rather be in your situation than mine, great as it is. Yours is a bit greater. Rain stopped smiling and looked at him with a hard-to-read, sad expression on her pale face. Then, she said quietly, oh. I see, sorry. I didn't know. She smiled a little and waved. Well, I'll be going then. Enjoy the pasta, Sonny. The young girl put her backpack back on, turned around, and left. Sonny remained on the porch for a while, staring at the tray of food. Slowly, a dark expression settled on his face. I can't continue doing nothing anymore. I need to make a decision and proceed. I wasted too much time as it is, already. He avoided doing anything about getting Rain ready for the possibility of becoming infected by the spell, because he didn't know what to do, and how. But this inaction had to stop. He had to come up with something. The problem was, he just didn't know enough to make a good decision. And even then, was he even qualified to make it? Sonny had a lot of experience dealing with various situations, possessed a quick wit, and was street smart, as well as having a real talent for killing things and remaining alive. Without wasting time on false modesty, he could admit that he excelled at many things. But were the things he excelled at even applicable to training a young girl for the nightmare spell? After all, what he wanted to give her were not combat skills or survival tactics. Those she was being taught already, in an elite school that someone like him would have never been able to attend. What he wanted to give her was a mindset that would allow her to survive in the unforgiving hell of the dream realm. And mind. Mind was a delicate thing. If he went about it in the wrong way, he could bring more harm than good. Not to mention that everyone was different, and what worked for him was not guaranteed to work for someone else. Take his own friends, for example. All of them had wildly diverging mindsets, but each had been able to thrive even in a place as dire and harrowing as the Forgotten Shore. So, what the hell do I do? Sonny massaged his temples, then sighed. First, he had to observe more and understand more. Whatever he wanted to decide, it was stupid to try and base that decision on observing Rain for a single day as she went about her classes. Maybe I'll get inspired, or my intuition will give me a hint. With that thought, he frowned, finished his tea, and went inside. The next morning, Sonny left his house early and used the transit system to reach the district where Rain's school was located. Now that he knew the place, he didn't need to follow his sister around. Instead, he went ahead, returned to the cafe he had hidden in the last time, and sent one of his shadows to keep watch on the entrance of the school as it waited for the young girl to appear. Half an hour later, he noticed her figure and silently ordered the shadow to follow Rain inside. I am going to have to keep studying her demeanor for a while. A few weeks, at least. By then, it is going to be clear if my initial impression was right, or if I need to reconsider my evaluation. I'll also understand her strengths and weaknesses much better. Sonny had to stop himself from groaning. A few weeks. That was going to really eat into his time. Both the hunt for shadow fragments and his training with Effie and Saint were going to suffer. Which was such a shame. Recently, he was starting to feel a hint of confidence when handling the cruel sight in its spear form. Previously, Sonny had mistakenly considered the spear to be a rather static weapon, one mostly capable of only straightforward thrusting attacks. And on the surface, it was. More than that, this was actually one of its best features. Anyone could use a spear with a decent level of effectiveness. That was why it ruled the battlefield for thousands of years. Unlike the sword, a person didn't need endless hours of practice to become a proficient amateur with it. But in the hands of a master, the spear was a completely different beast. It was swift, deadly, and unpredictable, capable of a vast variety of attacks at a wide array of ranges. It was a truly versatile weapon capable of dealing devastating damage to anyone who would dare to approach its wielder. What Sonny liked the most, though, was how deceiving a spear could be. Cruel Sight, in particular, was especially flexible due to its long blade, which could both pierce and slash, not to mention the fact that the length of its shaft could be changed at will. Sonny was still much more comfortable with swords, though, especially familiar ones, like the Midnight Shard of the Great Odachi form of the Soul Serpent. He was growing rather fond of the ability to keep his enemies further away from his body that the cruel sight gave him, nevertheless, so it was a real shame that he was going to have to reduce the amount of time he trained by a lot. That was not even the main reason why he felt malcontent about the prospect of spending weeks observing Rain at school, though. The main reason was teenagers. Sonny clearly remembered the mental trauma he had experienced after being forced to watch the young elites attending the prestigious school making life difficult for both themselves and the teachers. Even after having to fall into an endless abyss while eating the rotten meat of a devil and burning in the ocean of divine flames, he would rather repeat the whole thing than experience school life again. Well, almost. Not really. With a sigh, Sonny concentrated on the pastry in front of him and prepared for a long and arduous day. That pastry alone made his mood better, simply because of the fact that it didn't come from a mimic. The young elites were the same, venomous, incredibly misguided, and infuriating. Luckily, Rain was also the same. She studied quietly and avoided all the drama, which basically made her a pariah. Good girl, Rain. That's right, disregard all the nonsense and learn as much as you can. Knowledge is a privilege. These classmates of yours are too stupid to value it, but you're not. Well, it wasn't as though they were some delinquents, either. Academic achievement was the cornerstone of the social hierarchy in this elite school, so the competition among the students was fierce. It was just that most saw learning as a tool to earn status, as opposed to the goal. Not that their priorities were any of Sonny's business. Hour went after hour, and at some point, he decided to leave the cafe and take a walk to chase away the boredom. But before he could, however, something happened. His communicator suddenly let out a grating, echoing ringing sound. A second later, the sound repeated. And it wasn't only just him. Every person in the cafe, from the clients to the members of the staff, was receiving the same notification. Sonny's chest grew cold. He knew that sound, of course. Everyone in the world knew and dreaded it. Looking down, he saw the familiar text appear on the screen of his communicator. No. The notification read, Emergency alert. Emergency alert. Gate activity detected in your proximity. ETA, 201 seconds. Evacuate immediately. A gate. There is a gate. Before Sonny even comprehended these words, he was trembling, cold fear rising from the depths of his heart to swallow him whole. This was not a conscious response, but an instinctual reaction, something that his body had learned to do in the past, the terror that all modern humans came to bear in their very bones. The grating, echoing ringing meant only one thing. Run. Run if you wish to live, if you don't want to die in a manner so harrowing that words could not describe it. But Sonny wasn't a mundane human anymore. Strangling the instinctual fear, he threw it aside and stared at the screen of the communicator with a dark expression on his face. The notification was similar to the ones he had seen several times in the past. Previously, when he lived in the outskirts, he had learned of the devastation an opening gate could bring firsthand. Wherever you lived, you were bound to hear that sound once every few years. Granted, the infrastructure in the outskirts was way less developed than in the proper parts of the city, and there wasn't a lot of awaken around. So the results were often more disastrous. He was in a very respectable district right now. But ironically, things were much worse. Sonny wasn't very versed in the technology the government used to detect the appearing gates in advance, but he knew that it failed this time. Usually, people would receive a notification at least 10 minutes, half an hour, sometimes even days before the dreaded event. This gave most of them time to evacuate out of the impact zone, and also allowed the government forces to arrive before the flood of nightmare creatures broke free of the opening gate and cut through the ranks of the nearby awakened who tried to stall it. 200 seconds, that was nothing. Less than nothing. It was not nearly enough time for people to run, and not nearly enough for help to arrive. Such a small time window meant only one thing. That unless something happened, there was going to be a massacre. He was safe, though. He could just shadow step away at any moment. As people jumped to their feet and ran to the exit with panicked expressions, Sonny sighed and pressed on the notification. Immediately, a map opened up, showing him the location of where the gate was going to appear, as well as optimal evacuation routes. Too close. There was no way that Rain's school was going to be able to evacuate thousands of students in time. If their hazard protocols were well established, they were not even going to try. They would just gather the children in the most protected part of the school, activate their defense systems, and try to hold until help arrived. The school was in the direct vicinity of the opening gate, though. Sonny wasn't sure how well its defenses would do, no matter how formidable they were. Even if there were several awakened staffed as security personnel or instructors for this exact eventuality, they wouldn't be able to do much. The true elites would not take such positions, after all. What to do? This time, the notification interface was different from how Sonny had seen it in the past. There was an additional, urgently blinking symbol on the map. It was very similar to the insignia Master Jet wore on her sleeve, only this one had 2 stars on it instead of 3. This symbol was there because the communicator knew that Sonny wasn't awakened. There were 192 seconds remaining until the gate opened. Out in the classroom where one of his shadows was currently hiding, the children and the teacher were still staring at the notification with stunned expressions, not yet comprehending what it meant exactly. Or simply refusing to. Not paying a lot of attention to the chaos happening around him, Sonny pressed on the symbol, and additional information appeared on the screen. Attention all awakened. Request immediate action. Attention all awakened. Request immediate. Below that, several lines of text shimmered. Gate category, 2, 89% probability, 3, 10% probability, higher, undefined. Strike force ETA, 16 minutes, 14 seconds, 13 minutes. A corner of Sonny's twitched, a resentful grimace appearing on his face. The earliest any government force would be able to arrive to the gate was in 13 minutes after it had opened. 13 minutes. That might as well have been an eternity. Too long. And now, Sonny had to make a decision. He had to either run away or respond to the call to arms to stand in front of the nightmare gate, hoping to survive in the flood of monsters for 13 entire minutes. Well, it wasn't that hard of a decision, really. Sonny knew that he was going to stay, not out of any sort of moral obligation, but simply because he wanted to. He was equally as reluctant to turn tail and allow the spell to invade his world with impunity as he was to see countless nice, mundane humans die in the maws of nightmare creatures. Like the polite waitress who served him the delicious pastries, or the baker who had made them. This was his world, his city, and his fellow humans. Before, Sonny was always weak and had no choice but to run, hide, and tremble in fear. He was done living his life in fear a long time ago, though. He was also done allowing anyone, or anything, to take what was his without a bloody fight. He was done being weak. But even that wasn't the real reason. Perhaps Sonny would have considered the approaching disaster too much of a risk and retreated. But rain was there, very near to the center of the map displaying the gate's impact zone. So really, running away wasn't even an option. 180 seconds remained. Now left alone in the empty cafe, Sonny stood up and stretched. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. This is going to be a wild, wild ride. Now that he knew that he was insanity going to act, Sonny had to decide how exactly, and do it very fast. Sadly, the question was not as easy as it seemed. His life was too complicated for anything to be easy. Not only was the answer to the question not too obvious, but, what's worse, he had mere seconds to make a decision, which was not nearly enough to think things through with any sort of clarity. But what choice did he have? None at all. Sonny grimaced. Let's speedrun our options. The safest and most cowardly option was to shadow step into the classroom through the shadow spying on Rain, grab the girl, and bring her away. At least it seemed safe on the surface. In reality, though, such an action would cause all types of terrible consequences both for him and for his sister. Not only was he going to have a lot of explaining to do, revealing all the things he wanted to keep hidden, he would also leave countless witnesses, as well as digital evidence, connecting Rain to him and vice versa. In the future, whenever he was going to end up having really dangerous enemies, which Sonny had no doubt would happen one day, soon, that evidence was going to come to light and lead them to her. Which was not something he was willing to accept. So, he was going to leave that option as the last resort, and act on it only if the school's defenses were breached and Rain was in imminent danger. With that out of the way, there was only one path left, doing his civil duty and going directly to the gate, in hopes of stalling the tide of nightmare creatures long enough for the cavalry to arrive. Awakened who didn't work for the government were expected and encouraged, but not technically obligated to respond to a call like that. Many, maybe even most, did not, and chose to run instead. And who could blame them? Not everyone with an aspect was a combatant, and even those who had not become one voluntarily. Forcing these already traumatized people to go to their potential deaths under the threat of retribution if they refused was not something the government was eager to do. Or maybe, it simply couldn't. Forcing Awakened to do anything was a dangerous idea, since they could potentially topple the government if pushed too much. So, the government preferred to use a carrot instead of a stick when dealing with them. It was a delicate balance. Sonny wasn't sure that he was even going to see that carrot, though. Because he was facing a dilemma. Yes, he had decided to fight in front of the gate, but this could also be done in several ways. 2 ways, really. Sonny could go into battle as himself, or as Mongrel, protecting his identity from the prying eyes, and himself from any attention. Using Weaver's mask was not without risk, as every time he did so without proper preparations could potentially leave behind context clues that would allow smart people to narrow down the list of suspects. But the alternative? Right now, with not a lot of time to weigh all the pros and cons, Sonny felt that the alternative was worse. If he wanted to have a hope of surviving for 13 minutes, he was going to have to go all out, showcasing the full scope of his true powers. That meant that all his efforts to create an image of a talented, but not too dangerous or noteworthy young awakened were going to be destroyed. He was going to become really, really famous. And draw the eyes of entities he wanted to remain blind to his existence for as long as possible. Perhaps even worse, he was going to create one too many coincidences for Rain to continue not noticing his secret attention. It was one thing to have a quirky neighbor. If he suddenly showed up near your school in your moment of need, and turned out to be one of the most deadly awakened of his generation, though, that would most likely be enough to make her start asking questions that Sunny wasn't ready to answer. So, awakened Sunless was going to have to cowardly run away from the gate, while Mongrel was going to have to stand and fight. What a messed up situation. 170 seconds remained. Sunny sighed, knowing full well that this decision was not ideal. At the minimum, Mongrel's persona prevented him from using some of his most powerful tools, anything that people knew and associated with Sunny, no less. Like the cruel sight, very few people had seen him use Saint, however. In fact, outside of Neff's cohort, Mordred was pretty much the only person who had. There were also the people he had fought the Lord of the Dead with, but all of them were gone now. With one notable exception, Sishan was still alive and out there somewhere, in the embrace of one of the three great clans. So summoning Saint was not ideal, too. Even though someone else could have received a similar echo, revealing her was really risky. He could only do it if things got really desperate. Maybe I should reconsider. But there was no time to consider things anymore. There were less than 3 minutes left before the gate opened. He would just have to manage, somehow. Sunny closed his eyes for a moment, then checked where the cameras monitoring the cafe were located, and walked into their blind zone. There, he summoned the covetous coffer, placed his communicator on its lid, and sent the box scurrying in the direction opposite of where he himself was headed. After that, Sunny took a deep breath and dissipated into the shadows. A few seconds later and hundreds of meters away, an armored figure wearing a fearsome black mask walked out of the darkness, the blade of the great Odachi resting on its shoulder. Mongrel had arrived to the Nightmare Gate. The road ahead of Sunny was almost empty. Only several people could still be seen, running away from the vertical line where the air was rippling strangely, 100 or so meters behind their backs. When they saw his menacing figure, the stragglers recoiled. Someone let out a frightened yelp. Not paying them any attention, Sunny calmly walked forward. The soul serpent rested on his shoulder. Strange. I have never seen an opening gate up close before. The deserted street in front of him did, indeed, look very eerie. Not only because it was almost entirely empty, both of pedestrians and of rushing PTVs, but also because light and shadows were behaving very strangely, the hue of the light slightly wrong, the movement of the shadows slightly erratic. The sound was strange, too. It was deadly quiet, but at the same time, Sunny couldn't get rid of the feeling that there were barely audible noises coming from all directions, assaulting his ears like an inaudible cacophony of muffled, distant, demented screams. There was a strange pressure rising in the air, getting stronger the closer he got to the nascent Nightmare Gate. The gate itself was easy to recognize. It looked like a tall vertical depression in the fabric of the world, a place where light refracted in unnatural ways and the inaudible screams were the loudest. Not a rift in reality yet, but a hint of one. In front of the gate, half a dozen people stood, staring at it in tense silence. The awakened who, just like Sunny, decided to answer the call. Only 6 of them. While that fact didn't promise him anything good, it was to be expected. 200 seconds was just not enough for a lot of willing defenders to arrive. Even those who were ready to risk their lives in an attempt to protect the civilians needed time to get to the gate, after all. This bunch were those who had already been in the immediate impact zone when the alert was sent to their communicators, just like Sunny. Maybe they were overly confident in their abilities, or maybe, just like he, they had people they cared about in the surrounding area, perhaps even in the very same school where Rain was, a few hundred meters behind their backs. In any case, he couldn't help but feel a bit of respect toward these people. Coming to a gate already required a lot of courage. Remaining even after it became clear that there were going to be less than 10 awakened fighting side by side to stall the tide of monsters was beyond that. These people were ready to die to fulfill their duty. Fools. Brave fools. What about Sunny himself, then? I am a fool, too, but a cowardly one. Sunny had no plans of dying today. He knew what he was doing, and had ways to escape if things got too dire. Without slowing down even a little, he calmly walked past the 6 awakened and stopped with his back to them, closer to the gate than anyone else. Unwittingly, Sunny found himself standing at the head of the small group of defenders. Unlike them, he showed no sign of fear. The others were staring at the gate with pale faces, their bodies tense, their eyes full of unease and dark resentment. Sunny's pose, however, was confident, indifferent, almost relaxed, and in the eyes of the fearsome mask, there was nothing but darkness. The others reacted to his arrival with excitement. One more awakened to fight with them was already a good thing, But this one, in particular, looked especially imposing. His onyx armor and fearsome blade were obviously a cut above the memories they themselves had in their possession, and his calm demeanor suggested either an experienced fighter or a madman. And then, someone recognized him. Wait. Isn't that Mongrel? The others looked at the girl who spoke with confusion. Who? She stared at them with wide eyes. That's Lord Mongrel. Haven't you heard of him? A hint of recognition appeared in the eyes of the awakened gathered in front of the opening gate. One of them glanced at Sunny, lingered for a moment, and asked, I am sorry, friend. This young woman seems to have heard of you. If I may ask, are you an awakened of some renown? Sunny didn't move a muscle, and lied almost on autopilot. I am not an awakened. I have no renown. The man raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, not an awakened? Then who are you? Sunny cursed inwardly. My damn tongue. He gritted his teeth, remained silent for a second, and then answered in a calm tone. I am just a human. Then, he sighed and turned his head slightly, staring at the six awakened. From the look of their memories and how they held themselves, they weren't elites. Several seemed to know how to hold a sword, but that was all. They were going to get eaten alive once the gate opened. Disheartened, he asked, combat aspects? The defenders looked at each other, and then the girl who had recognized him answered, I have an awakened aspect that enhances my agility and allows me to strike with deadly precision. 2 guys have dormant aspects centered around endurance and strength, and the other 2 can perform ranged elemental attacks. So, 3 weak combat aspects, 2 supporting fighters, and no one capable of proper support or healing. He lowered his head for a moment. There were only 30 seconds left before the gate opened. Slight tremors were running through the ground beneath his feet, and bits of dust and small pieces of gravel were slowly rising into the air, levitating on the invisible currents of energy coursing through the air. How I'm going to do this? Sunny gripped the hilt of the soul serpent tighter, then said hoarsely, Stay back, kill anything that gets past me. He paused for a moment, and then added, Make them bleed. The girl stared at him with wide eyes. Stay back? But, sir, you can't do it alone. There will be a horde of them. Even if there were 100 of you, that wouldn't be enough to kill them all. Sunny turned away and looked at the slowly opening rift in front of him. How could he get these people to stay out of his way? The best place for them to be was at the back, finishing off anything that Sunny failed to kill and preventing the nightmare creatures from escaping into the city. Escaping toward Rain's school. Failing to come up with a better lie, he opened his mouth and said coldly, One of me is enough to kill them all. With that, Sunny left the girl standing there with an open mouth, and walked forward. What's the big deal, anyway? It's just a nightmare gate. His legs, however, were trembling a little. Just at that moment, an especially strong tremor ran through the ground. The shadows exploded in a mad dance, the sunlight growing dim and ghostly. The wind howled through the empty street, as if the air was being sucked into the widening rift. And then, an invisible shockwave spread out of it, making the windows in the surrounding building shatter. Sunny resisted the push and suddenly felt the familiar feeling permeate his soul. The call of a nightmare. The gate had opened. Sunny took a step forward and brandished the soul serpent, feeling the indomitable nature of Saint's grounded battle style permeate his bones. The gloomy shadow wrapped itself around the blade of the Odachi, causing it to shine with dark radiance. Just like the taciturn demon, this serpent shared a kinship with the shadow, and as such, the augmentation it received was even more powerful than Sunny himself could enjoy. Even though the Odachi was only of the dormant rank, for now, this alone made it equal to an awakened blade in terms of sharpness, durability, and lethality. He activated the living stone and feather of truth enchantments of the onyx armor to make it light as a feather and able to heal the damage it was bound to receive. Then, Sunny summoned the blood blossom charm and willed the armor to integrate it, activating the underworld armament enchantment. This way, the enhancing effect the crimson flower had on his memories and shadows was going to be inherited by the mantle itself, and then strengthened even further. He had not told the other awakened to make the nightmare creatures bleed just to seem cool. He literally needed there to be as much blood flowing to the pavement as possible, so that his armor and sword became as powerful as possible. The gate was open now, revealing a dark rift in the fabric of reality, as wide as the street itself and as tall as the buildings. It seemed to devour all light around it. And call to him. Call for him to enter. Sunny wasn't too preoccupied with the gate itself, though. His gaze was locked on the unclear silhouettes moving through the darkness. Soon, the first nightmare creature burst into the daylight, leaving cracks on the asphalt with its black claws. Good. Had he not wanted to accumulate shadow fragments? Had he not wanted to raise the counter of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment? Well, he should have been careful about what he wished for. There were going to be hundreds of abominations coming through the rift today to satiate his wish. The second category gates were the most frequent to appear in the waking world. As such, everyone was familiar with how they functioned. The first few waves of advancing nightmare creatures were not going to be too terrible, at least for a fighter of Sunny's caliber. They would be comprised mostly of dormant creatures, with some awakened abominations mixed in. Their classes and numbers, too, would be comparatively low. But these first few waves, they were just a hint of the horror to come. Pretty soon, every nightmare creature coming from the gate was going to be of the awakened rank, with more and more fallen ones appearing as well. Their classes were going to rise, until there were as many demons as there were monsters and beasts around. And if Sunny was still alive by the time this second stage was nearing its culmination, well, two things could happen, neither promising him anything good. Either the gate was going to end up really being of the second category, or not. If it continued to grow, reaching the third category, then there would be more and more waves of nightmare creatures, hundreds of fallen abominations lunging into the real world from the dark void between worlds, with corrupted horrors and creatures of higher classes appearing among them. If it didn't, then, the Guardian of the Gate would manifest itself into reality. The Guardian was always at least one rank higher than the Gate's category, and could be of any high class, from a devil to a dreaded titan. In any case, Sunny had to live through the initial waves first to find out what was going to kill him in the end. The first creature to appear from the darkness resembled a terrifying hound with blood-red bone spikes growing from its mottled, black fur. It landed on the road and opened its maw, then produced a guttural, hoarse roar, and then abruptly grew silent as Shadow Serpent's blade slashed across its neck, severing its head entirely. "You have slain a dormant beast." Sunny jumped back, and just as he did, more silhouettes lunged at him from the dark rift, their eyes burning with madness and bloodthirst as they smelled what was waiting for them up ahead. A whole world full of defenseless, untainted souls for them to devour. Not so fast, you filth. Sunny had a very simple plan. He was going to build a barrier in front of the gate. He was going to build a mountain of bleeding corpses right at the border of the darkness, to show the next waves of nightmare creatures how welcoming the real world was to their kind. As soon as more spiked hounds entered into the light, he lunged forward to meet them. Blood sprayed into the air, and as the menacing Odachi reaped another life, Sunny shifted his weight, slammed the pommel of the sword into the face of a lunging creature, then swiftly stepped forward and pierced the third one through the throat. Before the drops of blood even fell to the ground, he tore the blade from the corpse of the abomination, slicing it almost in half, and brought his heel on the skull of the beast he had previously slammed to the ground. In the process, he increased the weight of the mantle of the underworld, so the creature's head simply exploded under his boot. All of it took no more than 2 seconds. And on the third second, a dozen hellish beasts emerged from the rift, some of them running, some of them jumping high into the air to land on him from above. Behind them, a macabre wall of flesh, claws, and fangs was spilling out of the darkness like a rabid tide. Sunny growled, feeling the enchantment of the blood blossom activate and fill his sword with an unquenchable bloodlust. Come, you bastards, let this mongrel guide you all to hell." No matter how fast Sunny was, how intricate his control of the shadow essence was, he had spent a whole month doing nothing but practicing it. After all, no matter how strong his body could become as the result, he still couldn't be in several places at the same time. Yes, he had 2 cores brimming with power, and his armor and his weapon were augmented by a combination of an aspect ability and enchantments. Killing one of the infernal hounds without receiving a hit was not that big of a problem. Several, even. But a dozen? That was too much, even for him. So Sunny didn't even try. At this point, Mantle of the Underworld was as close to the pinnacle of the ascended rank as a memory could be, so these dormant beasts had no chance of piercing it with their fangs. He could allow himself to be bitten a few times. He just had to be strategic about it. He had to protect his neck and the back of his head, as well as pay attention to balance and mass. Yes, the abominations couldn't get to his flesh just yet, but an impact was still an impact. If he wasn't careful, the bastards were going to topple him, and once he was on the ground, the game would be over. Luckily, he had Feather of Truth at his disposal and could manipulate the weight of the onyx armor, turning it from incredibly light to as heavy as a mountain. In conjunction with the cautious use of Saint's grounded style, which excelled at solid footwork and indomitability, he could stay upright no matter how many beasts attacked him. Ignoring the creatures that were lunging at him from the ground, Sunny dashed to the side to avoid being landed on by one of the jumping hounds, and received another on the tip of the Odachi, allowing the momentum to impale it on the sword. Before the heavy carcass could weigh the Shadow Serpent down, Sunny used the long hilt as a lever and slammed the dead creature into the mass of its attacking kin. By that time, one jaw was already closing on his thigh, and another was centimeters away from his forearm. The blood-red fangs scraped against the stone-like metal of the onyx armor, not leaving even a scratch on it. Sunny let go of the hilt of the Odachi with one hand, then hooked its blade under the throat of one of the attacking abominations and made a simple move forward, slicing through tough fur, skin, and vulnerable flesh beneath. His other fist landed on the head of the second beast. Unseen to anyone, the moonlight shard appeared in it at the last moment, its ghostly blade easily piercing the creature's skull and disappearing as fast as it had appeared after destroying its brain. Sunny spun, throwing both corpses aside, caught the hilt of the Odachi with his second hand, made a small thrust to pierce a lunging hound's head right through one of its eyes, and then dashed forward to descend on the group of them entangled in the carcass of the abomination he had caught on the tip of his blade earlier. What happened next could only be described as a morbid, bloody dance. Sunny moved through the mass of nightmare creatures, much faster than any of them were, his great sword flying through them with graceful and fluid logic, sending more and more blood spraying into the air. Somehow, he managed to avoid most of their attacks, and those he did not ended up sliding fruitlessly from his armor. He almost made it look easy. But of course, it wasn't. Any of these beasts, even though they were only dormant, could massacre countless mundane humans, or kill a less skillful awakened in one fell lunge. It was just that today, they met a far more terrifying creature, a true awakened fighter, and a monstrous one, at that. Sunny cut through the mass of spiked hounds, strategically leaving many of them maimed, but alive. They could only bleed as long as they weren't dead, after all, and he needed them to bleed a lot to bring the blood blossom to the peak of its strength. There were many of them around him. Too many, really, but that, too, could be used to his advantage. He used the corpses of the beasts he had slain, the ones he had left alive, and those who were yet to meet his blade as a barrier to slow down the others. Through superior speed and clever positioning, he was able to not only always remain moving, but also evade being surrounded. Things weren't exactly easy, but he was still managing without too much strain. His main problem right now was to not allow any of the abominations to move past him and escape into the streets. Luckily, the few that did manage to slip by were quickly finished by the 6 awakened staying behind, observing the massacre with grim, tense, and darkly odd expressions. However, Sunny wasn't oblivious to the fact that this successful start was an illusion. The first wave was just an appetizer, after all, simply a hint of the true calamity to come. So, his goal, for now, was to kill as many of the dormant beasts as he could, bring the augmentation of the blood blossom to considerable strength, and throw as many corpses at the stretch of cracked asphalt directly in front of the gate as possible, to make it harder for the stronger abominations to enter into the reel at full speed. He felt the dreaded change too soon, though. It came in a form of an eerie, long whistle that suddenly made the hounds lunge at him with renewed fury. And then, a crude arrow suddenly flashed out of the darkness of the rift, almost hitting him in the eye. The arrowhead, fashioned out of a splinter of a red bone, exploded against the wood of Weaver's mask, throwing his head back. What the? He swiftly repositioned and caught his balance, then dashed forward and skewered several beasts on the blade of the shadow serpent. More arrows flew out of the darkness, piercing the flesh of the attacking hounds or sliding off the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld. He felt each hit, though. The power behind these arrows was truly monstrous. Awakened creatures are coming. Already? As soon as he thought that, the first of the hunters came out of the darkness, following their hounds into the real world. Sunny gritted his teeth. A tall, desiccated humanoid with skin as black as coal and as rough as the bark of an ancient tree, wearing rotten remains of fur armor, raised a mighty bow made out of wood and bone, and looked at him with empty holes where his eyes should have been. Furious, red flames burned in their darkness instead. Crap. Sunny grabbed one of the hounds and hoisted its body up. Just in time for the arrow to pierce its body instead of hitting him in the face. Bows? They're using bows? How was that even fair? Feeling the bloodlust of the blossom charm surge in his heart, Sunny threw the dying hound at the bone hunter, gripped his sword, and dashed forward once again. There were several ancient archers aiming at him already, and more of the hunters were appearing from the darkness. Some wielded bows, some spears with jagged flint blades and crude axes. Those were awakened monsters, each and every one, equal in rank and class to Carapace centurions Sunny had fought once, a long time ago, on the Forgotten Shore. And to Sunny himself, technically, a much tougher enemy for him to slaughter. Luckily, unlike the massive centurions, the hunters weren't covered in adamantine chitin from head to toe. Ducking under the flying arrow, Sunny lunged forward and thrust the tip of the Odachi into the desiccated flesh of one of the bowmen. The black, bark-like skin offered a lot of resistance to the shadow-honed blade, but the force of the blow was terrible enough to rip through flesh and bone, allowing it to pierce the body of the hunter and emerge from his back. Sunny just hoped that these bastards had anatomy similar to humans, and that their hearts were located in the same place. From the look of it, they were. However, the monster did not react to having his heart destroyed as a human would. Instead of dying, he simply grabbed the blade of the shadow serpent and took a step forward, skewering himself deeper onto it, in an attempt to reach Sunny with the other hand. Curses. Sunny twisted the blade, severing the monster's fingers, and then pulled the Odachi upward, slicing through his ribcage, neck, and skull. This, finally, caused the bowman to die. You have slain an awakened monster, ancient barrow wraith, revenants. Great. Simply great, damn it. So he was fighting corpses that were possessed by some sort of a murderous spirit. As such, the hunters weren't fully sentient. That didn't stop them from remembering some of their craft, though. Not only were they able to wield their stone weapons with deadly skill, they also seemed to coordinate their attacks, hurting Sonny like prey. The archers moved apart so that he would have no choice but to show his back to one while attacking another. Those with melee weapons rushed forward, aiming to surround him. The situation was quickly turning desperate. Sonny gritted his teeth, dodged a strike of a stone axe, saw it shatter the asphalt into dust, and lashed out with a shadow serpent. Just a moment after the blade of the great Odachi severed the attacker's legs, another arrow hit him in the shoulder, causing Sonny to stagger and almost lose his balance. He glanced around him, noticing that the enemies had succeeded in positioning themselves in a way that would have doomed a normal enemy. He was surrounded from all sides, with archers hiding behind mighty hunters wielding spears and axes. Damn it. I didn't want to do this. As a dozen arrows streaked through the air to bite at his armor, Sonny suddenly disappeared. A moment later, he appeared behind one of the archers and decapitated him with one terrible strike. Before others even had time to register what had happened, Sonny was inexplicably at the opposite side of their formation, his Odachi piercing the head of another archer. Almost leaving afterimages behind, the figure of the warrior in the menacing onyx armor seemed to blink between half a dozen monsters in the span of a few seconds. Each time it appeared, one of the creatures died, their black bodies crumbling into piles of severed limbs and shattered skulls. The blade of the great Odachi shone with dark radiance, cutting through the ancient hunters like a reaper's scythe. A few moments later, Sonny slid backward on the broken asphalt, leaving a bloody trail behind. A low growl escaped from beneath his mask. Enhanced by the underworld armament, the enchantment of the blood blossom was behaving strangely. It was supposed to augment his memories, echoes, and shadows, but with so much blood flowing to the ground, Sonny found that even his body and mind were being affected by the morbid charm a little. He felt both exhilarated and frustrated, exhilarated by the slaughter he was perpetrating, and frustrated because he needed to kill more, cut more, make them bleed more, so much more. Blood. More. Sonny basked in the ecstasy of bloodshed for a split second, and then lashed out at himself, making the rabid thirst recede. He needed to be careful. This bloodlust was beneficial, but could easily blind him. He had to maintain clarity. That was the only way to control the flow of the battle and survive. Thankfully, he knew how to keep a cool head better than most. Regardless, although using shadow step so many times in rapid succession cost him a lot of shadow essence, he had managed to break the enemy formation and eliminate most of the archers. The rest were going to be much easier to deal with now. But of course, the gate was not done with him. It continued to spew more and more enemies, making any progress he had made meaningless. As a new wave of hunters emerged from the darkness, a frenzied mass of hounds rushing between the wraiths, he paled a little. Too many. No matter how superior his armor, weapon, and skill were, he was going to get buried under the tide of nightmare creatures due to their momentum. And even if he managed to cut a hole in the wall of abominations, the rest were going to move past him and descend upon the six awakened, and then, inevitably, escape into the streets of the city. Fort Rain School. Damn. This is going to suck. As the new wave of creatures lunged forward, joining the survivors of the previous one, Sonny shifted his memories around. For a brief second, the broken oath took the place of the blood blossom, its soul-eroding aura being inherited and enhanced by the mantle of the underworld. A wave of nausea washed over Sonny's mind. Arg! A mental scream rang in his head. Luckily, he was prepared for the pain. His armor provided him with a solid defense against soul attacks, too. Even ones coming from the mantle itself. The attacking nightmare creatures, on the other hand, had no resistance to it at all. Sonny had only kept the broken oath active for a second before changing the slotted charm back to the blood blossom, but it was enough to break the momentum of the tide of abominations. The hunters staggered, the hounds stumbled and slowed down. For a brief moment, the whole mass of monsters seemed disoriented. Sonny used this opportunity well. The dark figure wearing a fearsome mask suddenly appeared in the very middle of the enemies, and before the nightmare creatures could regain their bearing, the great blade of the Odachi turned into a whirlwind of darkness, leaving clouds of bloody mist and severed corpses everywhere he went. Sonny had abandoned Saint's grounded style, reduced the weight of the mantle of the underworld to that of a feather, and turned to pure offense, dancing between the enemies like a dark, slaughtering demon. For now, he was still at his peak, but exhaustion was already not too far behind. As he fought, his breath was slowly becoming hoarse and labored. How long has it been? He thought back to what had happened until now, and felt the first hint of desperation. Just a couple of minutes. The whole battle took slightly more than 2 minutes. And he had to continue for at least 11 more. 6 minutes. That was how long Sonny managed to hold on until things really went from bad to terrible. By then, the ground in front of the gate was littered with piles of corpses, their blood flowing down the pavement like a crimson stream. He had lost count of how many dormant abominations he had slain, how many ancient hunters he had sliced apart. Despite how strong and fearsome the primeval wraiths were, their assault had broken against the impenetrable barrier of his blade, his aspect, and his will. Sonny paid a price, though. By now, his muscles were burning, and he had to force the air in and out of his struggling lungs. The mantle of the underworld held, but his body beneath the black stone-like metal was beaten and battered. The armor itself was covered in blood and dented slightly in several places. Those dents did not come from the hunters, though. During the third wave, new nightmare creatures emerged from the darkness of the gate. Among them were larger beasts, more terrifying than the hounds Sonny had been slaughtering. And their masters, the demons of the mysterious barrow, were similar to the desiccated huntsmen, but much taller, stronger, and better equipped. They wielded masterfully crafted flint weapons and armors made out of rotten leather and bone, their empty eyes burning with hungry red flames. What's worse, they really knew how to use their stone spears and swords. Met with the strange, ferocious, and deviously lethal battle style of the primeval demons, Sonny was sent for a loop. This was like nothing he had ever experienced before. They fought with the straightforward, yet insidious resolve of cunning apex predators, with the evil will to kill through any means necessary, always following the most efficient and barbarously cruel path to dominance. It should not have worked, but it did. The dents on Sonny's armor could attest to it. Well, he shouldn't have been surprised. If these ancient wraiths came from people similar to his own world's prehistoric humans, then they were the most devastating of predators, ruthless killers on a planetary scale. From what little Sonny knew about history, ancient humans had spread across the whole planet like a plague, eviscerating whole types of living creatures, including all other nascent branches of the humankind, in one fell avalanche. With their flint weapons and the knowledge of fire, they became nothing less than the cause and perpetrators of the sixth mass extinction, equal to the likes of massive asteroids and climate shifts despite their puny size and lifespan. He was kind of starting to miss the Carapace Legion. In any case, Sonny somehow managed to kill these terrifying fighters, a few of them, at least, 2. More than that, he reached into the very essence of Shadow Dance and greedily absorbed every nuance of their primeval and ferocious fighting style, and then reflected it back at the waves of nightmare creatures, bringing his already terrifying dance of death to a truly chilling level of brutality. The blood blossom had long ago reached its limit. Minutes passed, and despite the fact that Sonny was battered and growing dangerously tired, his reserves of shadow essence swiftly diminishing, for a few moments, he felt as though he had things under control. That maybe, just maybe, he was going to stand his ground for the whole 13 minutes. And then, he realized that he would not. As the 6th minute came to an end, a furious bellow shook the world, and something massive lunged at him from the darkness of the gate. The barrier of corpses he had built in front of it exploded, and a giant beast, twice as tall as Sonny as weighing at least 20 times more, emerged from it in a cloud of blood and bone fragments, 2 empty eye sockets full of ghostly red flame. Sonny stared at it with wide eyes. The creature resembled a giant bison, its black fur mottled and rotten, a ridge of long, scarlet bone spikes piercing the hide along the spine. The head of the monstrosity was crowned with 2 jagged, blood-red horns. A fallen. That thing is fallen. The bison was also different from the hounds and larger beasts he had been fighting against, since it, just like the ancient hunters, was itself a wraith. A corpse reanimated by the malevolent spirit of red flame. Crap. Sonny hurriedly commanded the Feather of Truth to make his armor as heavy as possible and lowered his stance, knowing full well that he couldn't allow that thing to get past him. In the next moment, 2,000 kilograms of rotting flesh and sharp horns crashed into him at full speed. CR. For a split second, everything became dark. Then, Sonny found himself bouncing off the asphalt and then rolling across it at a terrible speed, up until the moment a wall of a building stopped him and exploded, shards of cement flying into the air. Not good. Disoriented, he shook his head, feeling drops of blood seep under Weaver's mask, and then used the shadow serpent to help himself stand up. Then, he looked toward the gate through the red mist clouding his sight. The massive wraith was approaching the 6 terrified awakened. Its speed, however, was slow, and its step staggered. There was a big hole in its forehead where the thick, adamantine bones of the skull were shattered and cracked, bits of bloody pulp spilling out of it and falling to the ground. Just before the impact, Sonny had brought his armored fist down on it, summoning the moonlight shard at the last moment. His plan was to pierce the big bastard's brain, but because of the violent force and momentum of their collision, he ended up doing that, and then punching a hole through the creature's forehead with his spiked gauntlet. Sonny's thoughts were slow and astray, but he was already starting to regain his senses. I have a concussion, I think. Failing to breach the last few meters to the six awakened, the bison stopped and swayed. Its legs suddenly caved, and it toppled over, sending a tremor running through the ground. A flood of abominations was already rushing into the breach it had created, though. Into the empty space where Sunny had been. Still disoriented, Sunny staggered, then raised the soul serpent weakly. Bad. This is really, really bad. As nightmare creatures rushed forward, the six awakened began to act. The two with elemental aspects attacked first. Something flashed in the air, and then one of them was suddenly surrounded by a swiftly spinning ring of fire. The fire disk then flew forward and collided against the mass of abominations, immolating one of the hounds and burning several more. The other raised her hand, and a thin blade made of nothing but air whistled as it bit into the flesh of one of the hunters, severing one of his arms at the shoulder. Sunny blinked. You have slain a fallen monster. The fastest of the nightmare creatures were already lunging at the defenders. The girl he had spoken to before took a step forward and attacked with a slender saber, striking at the neck of a spiked hound and opening its artery with a precise cut. Two more awakened were covering her from the sides, both wielding a shield and a memory weapon of their own, one a short sword, the other a steel pike. The last one did something to repel the arrows that were already flying toward their bodies, but Sunny had no idea what. Your shadow grows stronger. The awakened were performing well. They acted with sufficient coordination and foresight, doing everything in their power to slow down the tide of approaching monsters. Although not elites, each of them was a capable combatant. They were brave and determined. And yet, it was not going to be enough. Not nearly enough to survive, let alone prevent the invaders from escaping into the city. You have received a memory. What to do? What to do? Not fully realizing what he was doing, Sunny commanded the shadow to wrap itself around his body, and for the soul serpent to slither back onto his skin. Immediately, he felt much more powerful, his head more clear, his muscles brimmed with raw strength, double what he had just a second ago. His breathing became deeper. Sunny knew that he had to slow the abominations down, and then get back into the fight. That was the only way. Making a step forward, he swayed a little, and then grabbed the roof of an abandoned PTV to help himself keep balance. Bending down, he then grabbed the bottom of the heavy alloy vehicle with his other hand, sending all of his essence rushing through his body, flooding it with as much strength as he could muster. He then growled and dug into the alloy with his fingers. And then, sending cracks through the asphalt, Sunny strained every muscle in his body to perform one devastating, explosive push. The window of the PTV exploded, and as its frame deformed, the whole vehicle suddenly flew into the air. It breached the distance between him and the rushing tide of nightmare creatures and crashed into it from the side like a bizarre cannonball, turning several dormant beasts into bloody pulp, breaking numerous bones, and sending most of the front row of abominations tumbling down. The runes shimmered in front of Sunny, and with no time to waste, he threw just one look at them, searching for the description of his new memory. He was only interested in one thing. Memory type. Weapon. Good enough. Not bothering with reading the rest, Sunny summoned the weapon and used Shadow Step to appear amid the reeling abominations. Some had avoided his improvised ram and were already either attacking the six awakened or escaping into the streets. He couldn't do anything about it now. What he could do, though, as an ancient spear with a head crafted out of a long and sharp piece of black obsidian materialized in his hands, he thrust it into the throat of one of the wraiths, then used its back end to slam another one in the chest. Then, Sunny spun the spear and brought it down on the head of a lunging hound, shattering its skull with one terrifying blow. While he tried to overcome the ringing in his ears and continued to fight, more nightmare creatures got past him. And more still were already emerging from the gate. Die, die, die. Die, you damn wretches, die faster. They breached the line of defenders. The voice of the headmaster seemed calm, considering the situation, so the children gathered in the combat training hall of the school didn't panic, either. Nevertheless, they could feel that the adults were frightened, and that fear spread like an infection. The children were frightened, too. For many of the younger kids, this was the first time they experienced being near an opening gate. Those who were older knew what to do, in theory. Only none of those things could be done. There was just not enough time to evacuate or reach the nearest shelter, and so, the lessons they had learned were useless. Everyone was gathered in the most protected place in the school, the gymnasium, and huddled together. The younger children were placed in the middle, the older ones near the edge, with the teachers standing the furthest from the center. The combat instructors were armed with actual memory weapons, which looked menacing and beautiful. At least to Rain, who had never seen her teacher wield one of his real weapons before. With him, the other instructors, and a couple of bodyguards who happened to be inside the school because of those children whose parents were really important. There were 5 awakened among them, each armed and ready to fight. The other teachers and older students were armed, too, albeit with mundane weapons. Rain herself was holding her training sword, realizing for the first time how flimsy and pathetic it was. Before, the sword had always seemed to weigh a ton and be unnecessarily sharp. Now, she wished that it was a real weapon, and not just a training one. What is going to happen? Because she happened to be standing near the headmaster, she saw her combat instructor glance at him and say something in a low voice. Rain wasn't supposed to hear it, most likely, but she did. He said, "It's a miracle that they held that long. Really, only 7 of them. I don't know who these people are, but they should have been overwhelmed in the first minute." Overwhelmed? But, if 7 awakened were supposed to die in less than a minute, then what about the 5 protecting us? Rain suddenly felt cold and scared. The whole thing didn't seem real. How can something like this happen? This school was so prestigious and expensive, and so many important people sent their children here. Surely, the defenses. As if answering her thoughts, muffled sounds of firing penetrated the walls and sent shivers running through everyone's bodies. The automatic turrets had gone online, which meant that there were nightmare creatures approaching. Rain's father worked for the government, handling matters having to do with the logistical support of the awakened, and although he didn't like to talk about work, she knew more about these matters than most kids of her age. Because of that, she understood how ineffective mundane weapons were against the creatures of the spell, especially ones of higher ranks. So she just hoped that something broke with a deafening crash, and the whole gymnasium suddenly trembled. See, curses. Rain gripped the hilt of her sword tighter, and turned toward where the crash had come from with a pale face. Her eyes widened. Hundreds of meters away, in the mass of nightmare creatures, Sunny sent another abomination to hell, threw its body away, and growled. There were so many of them. Too many. Through the shadow hiding beside Rain, he saw that those monsters that had gotten past him and the other defenders had reached the school. He also saw more and more creatures arriving through the gate. Beasts, monsters, and demons, awakened and fallen. There was simply no end to them, and he was dead tired and growing weaker, fast. His body was at its limit, his reserves of shadow essence were running dry, and even the mantle of the underworld was showing signs of straining to resist the never-ending rain of blows he was not able to evade anymore. Feeling blood streaming down his face, Sunny briefly glanced toward the distant school, then back at the gate, and then, he shivered. Something had changed. Something was coming. In the darkness of the gate, a new silhouette appeared. A moment later, all the beasts that surrounded him froze, and then howled triumphantly, as if to welcome the new creature to the waking world. The gate guardian had arrived. If audio player doesn't work, press stop then play button again. Sunny stared at the gate, momentarily paralyzed by dread. Then, he snapped out of it and fought through exhaustion, rushing to kill as many abominations as he could before the guardian came out of the gate. He had an inkling that after, there would not be an opportunity to pay them any attention. Is it the guardian? How many minutes has it been? He had no idea. Somewhere along the way, Sunny had lost count of the time. All he knew was that it had not been long enough. Meanwhile, a hulking figure emerged from the darkness of the gate, and as it did, the red flames burning in the empty eye sockets of the ancient wraiths flashed brighter, their dead mouths opening to produce a litany of menacing howls. Crap. The guardian was more than 4 meters tall, his desiccated body resembling that of the primeval hunters and demons Sunny had fought, but at the same time much more frightening. He wielded a long spear, its blade cut out of a single slab of obsidian and covered in so many stains of ancient, dried blood that it seemed as if the stone itself had absorbed them and turned dark red. The giant was wearing an intricate leather armor, much more robust and imposing than those of the lesser wraiths, with strips of strange, bluish iron woven onto it. His wrists bore dozens of bracelets made out of iron and bone, and on his shoulders was a cloak fashioned out of the hide of some terrifying monster. The skull of the creature served as his helm, and his face was covered by a disturbing burial mask, its features twisted and bestial. The mask, and the skull on his head, each had 3 eyes, all 6 emanating intense, malevolent red radiance. Sunny felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What is that thing? He didn't know what kind of a creature the ancient chieftain was, but had no doubts that he was a fallen tyrant. And a very powerful one, at that. Maybe the barrow these wraiths were coming from had been built to entomb this ancient menace, to begin with, and his mask had 3 eyes. Anything with 3 eyes made Sunny shudder, for reasons he did not fully understand. After the Forgotten Shore, he knew that this was a sign of something too terrible for him to know. Could he kill a fallen tyrant? Maybe if he had a lot of time to prepare and study his enemy, and attack from the shadow. But now, with Sunny exhausted and battered, his shadow essence running out, and hundreds of nightmare creatures surrounding their master in bloodthirsty exultation, he stood no chance. None at all. Well, maybe a very tiny one. And what else was he going to do other than try and fight, put his tail between his legs and run away? Well, sure. Why the hell not? Sunny was not some kind of a hero, nor had he ever wanted to be one. But he wasn't going to run away just yet. As the nightmare creatures renewed their assault with even more frenzied rage than before, he gritted his teeth and brandished the obsidian spear, feeling the primal battle style of the ancient wraith seep into his very bones. Sonny was not done spilling blood. He had a little bit of fight left in him. Still, in the gymnasium, silence and fear gave way to mayhem and panic. The walls of the school had been breached, and nightmare creatures crawled inside, madness burning in their terrifying empty eyes. Back! Get back! The children were pushed against one of the walls, teachers standing between them and the terrible monsters with mundane weapons in their trembling hands. The awakened were engaged in a ferocious battle, but just the 5 of them were not nearly enough to stop all the abominations. It was inevitable that sooner or later, some of the abominations were bound to get through. And soon, they did. A giant, harrowing beast that resembled an infernal wolf, jagged red spikes growing through its black flesh and drops of saliva falling from its maw, tore free of the battle and lunged at the children. Rain had never seen something so unstoppable. How was anyone supposed to fight such a thing? No human possibly could. The teachers tried, however. Several of them drew their bows, but the arrows simply slid off the mottled black fur of the hellhound. The headmaster tried to stop the creature with a heavy pike, but was simply thrown away, the weapon flying out of his hands. And then, there was no one else standing between the monster and the defenseless children. God damn it. Sonny was at the end of his rope, which, in a sense, was precisely where he wanted to be. He wasn't trying to stop the flood of nightmare creatures by killing all of them anymore. That was simply impossible, with how many there were, and how many were coming from the gate every second. He was, however, trying to draw as much attention as he could. All of the attention, really, and to accomplish that, he had to do one simple thing. He had to attack the tyrant. How hard could it be? Let's find out. Sonny wasn't planning to get into a prolonged fight with the damn Barrow Chieftain, or whatever that thing was called. He was just going to exchange 1. Maybe 2 strikes with the scary bastard, hopefully deal him a tiny wound, and shadow step into safety. Enough was enough. He knew his limits. Tearing through the mass of abominations, Sonny cut a bloody path toward the hulking tyrant, and finally appeared in front of him. As soon as the burial mask with 3 burning red eyes turned his way, Sonny suddenly felt small and weak. The pain he felt in his battered body surged, and an involuntary groan escaped from his lips. He just wanted to stop and fall to the ground. To kneel. Arg. A mind attack? What? That is all. Bastard, you should have met Gunlock. Learned how to really make people cower. And also, his own mask was much scarier than the crude thing covering the tyrant's face. Fighting through the oppressive hex, Sonny lunged forward and raised his bloodied spear. He didn't get a chance to attack, though. Although it didn't seem as if the tyrant of the barrow was moving with haste, his hand shot toward Sonny with such terrifying speed that he barely had time to react. The giant didn't even deem it necessary to use a weapon, intending to crush him with a fist. Making the mantle of the underworld as heavy as he could, Sonny turned the shaft of the spear around and held it with both hands, knowing to deflect the blow instead of blocking it. He should have been able to. The fist of the desiccated giant connected with the ancient spear, and easily shattered it, as though it was a mundane stick and not a memory of the ascended rank. Before Sonny could even feel the terrible impact reverberate through his bones, 5 massive fingers closed around his torso like a steel bear trap. And squeezed. See, crap. Your memory has been destroyed. What a shame. He didn't even get a chance to learn what it was called. The stone-like metal of the mantle of the underworld groaned, but held. His bones, reinforced by the steadfast temperance of the bone weave, held too. Not that Sonny was having a good time. It felt as though he was being slowly crushed to death, unable to draw in a single breath. It hurt as hell, too. Much worse than that, actually. But worse still, while the tyrant had him in his grip, he couldn't use shadow step. He couldn't escape. I think. I messed up. As Sonny struggled in the tyrant's iron grip, the giant tilted his head a little, and easily lifted him off the ground, bringing his prey closer to the 3 burning red eyes. Sonny gritted his teeth and groaned, feeling his whole body being slowly crushed by the monstrous chieftain of the Barrow Wraiths. One of his arms was pressed against his body, and the other one was, too. But just barely. If only he could free it. But no matter how hard he tried, the tyrant's hold was just too strong. Back in the gymnasium, the terrifying beast was lunging at the defenseless children. Its maw was wide open, the red shine of the ghostly flames burning in its eyes reflecting from the jagged, sharp fangs. It was flying directly at Rain, moments away from closing its jaw on her throat. She felt paralyzed by fear, desperately wishing to run, but unable to move. Was this how she was going to die? No. It couldn't be. But it was. Suddenly, a spark of a strange, dark emotion ignited in Rain's heart. Die? No. Not like this. I refuse. She was holding a sword, was she not? Even if that thing was going to devour her, Rain was determined to die fighting, just like she had been taught to. She was going to remain human, not a cowering animal only good enough to be the stronger beast's prey. She owed that much to her parents, at least. Knowing full well that her dull training sword was not going to stop a nightmare creature, Rain stubbornly made a motion to raise it. Even though her mind was panicked and her thoughts scattered, the body remembered countless hours of practice. Not that it was going to do her any good. The hound was already so close that she could see every harrowing detail of its hideous snout and frothing maw. There was no escape. Unfair. This is unfair. This childish thought appeared in her mind, as it had undoubtedly appeared in the minds of countless people just before they were killed. And then, something strange happened. Suddenly, two beautiful magenta lights ignited in the darkness to the side of the lunging creature. A moment later, a dark blade of a strange, stone-like sword flashed out of the shadows and easily sliced through the abomination's neck, separating its head from its torso. A round shield made of something that resembled stone then appeared and swatted the headless body away from Rain, not allowing even a drop of blood to fall on her. As she froze in shock, a graceful woman wearing menacing black armor stepped out of the darkness, two ruby flames burning behind the visor of her closed helmet. Rain had never seen someone so terrifying, yet so magnificent. The woman glanced at her with indifferent calmness, and then turned around to easily pierce another hound with her stone-like sword, then sever one more in half with a swift, vicious strike. It was as though the flesh of the abominations offered her no resistance. 3. She just killed 3 nightmare creatures. And not only that, but she also killed them in the span of a second, with a confident, relaxed ease. Who is she? Before Rain knew what she was doing, she heard herself saying in a small voice, "Who are you?" The beautiful knight did not answer and simply stood between the children and the advancing monsters, her back straight and solid like a stone wall. Rain stared at that back, feeling as if nothing was going to get past this frightening, taciturn warrior. A burning desire suddenly appeared in her heart. She didn't know whether the menacing black knight was a human, a spirit, or a strange nightmare creature. But she knew one thing. Strong. I want to be strong, someday. Strong like her. In front of the gate, Sonny was slowly suffocating in the iron grip of the fallen tyrant. He was being brought closer and closer to the 3 burning red eyes, and as he did, it felt as if life itself was being sucked out of him, his mind balancing on the verge of breaking apart. What the hell? There had to be something that he could do. Some trick he could employ to wrestle free, a memory he could summon, an enchantment he could activate. But no matter how hard he tried, nothing worked. Sonny's vision was slowly starting to grow dark. Damn it. I need to. He could have summoned the cruel sight if his hands were free, but they were not. He could have turned the mantle of the underworld too heavy for the tyrant to lift, but it was already as heavy as the feather of truth, aloud, weighing as much as a small mountain. What else was there in his arsenal? Sonny was almost ready to panic, and then a subtle change suddenly happened to the world. It was easily missed or discarded, more of a feeling than an actual shift. Sonny only noticed it because it felt strangely familiar. It felt as though the whole world suddenly became colder by a couple of degrees. But why would it? Before he could properly consider the meaning of the subtle change, though, something flashed through the air, and suddenly, Sonny could breathe again. He could do so because the hand holding him wasn't connected to the tyrant's body anymore, the arm severed cleanly at the elbow. What? Sonny fell to the ground and rolled away as a fountain of seething blood shot out of the stump that used to be a wraith chieftain's arm, evaporating and turning into a cloud of scorching red mist. What just happened? Still reeling, he struggled to stand up and saw someone landing on a piece of rubble next to him. It was a beautiful woman who seemed to be in her late 20s. She was wearing a dark blue uniform with silver epaulets and leather boots, her short hair as black as a raven's feather, and her skin as white as snow. Her icy blue eyes were colder than the deepest reaches of a frozen hell. In her hand, the woman was holding a somber glaive, drops of boiling blood swiftly turning into ice on its slender blade. She looked like Death herself. Master Jet. Indeed, it was Soul Reaper Jet. The cavalry had arrived. Sonny had never been that happy to see anyone in his entire life. Master Jet arrived just in the nick of time, saving him from having to regret the decision to send Saint to aid Rain. Not to mention that she was really pleasant to look at. More importantly, taking off a fallen tyrant's arm with one strike. Even for an ascended, this was an incredible feat. Tyrants were not creatures one usually dared to challenge alone. Instead, they were dreaded horrors that were capable of decimating whole cohorts of experienced, battle-hardened fighters. Masters rarely worked together, simply for the fact that there were too few of them and too much for each one to do. But facing a tyrant was one of the things that pushed them to band together. And even then, not everyone was guaranteed to return from the fight. Truly, Teacher Julius had not been exaggerating when he said that even saints were wary of Soul Reaper Jet. And yet, although her entrance was spectacular, Would she be able to battle the tyrant and survive? Even though the chieftain was seriously wounded, that wound came from a surprise attack. Now that she lost the advantage, things could change really fast. As if answering his thoughts, Master Jet glanced at him. Despite the fact that they were surrounded by piles of corpses, the terrifying giant looming above them like an omen of doom, an unexpected smile suddenly appeared on her cold face. Cool mask. With that, Soul Reaper sprung forward, turning into a blue blur. Her movements were so fast that Sunny had only been able to perceive them because he was an awakened, his senses vastly superior to that of a mundane human. Several things happened at the same time. The somber glaive flew away as it spun fast enough to appear as a blurry circle. It cut a bloody swath in the mass of abominations, eviscerating dozens in a matter of a second as it moved in a wide arc. At the same time, Master Jet streaked across the bloodied, broken asphalt and appeared behind the tyrant, then caught the glaive and immediately lunged forward in a devastating thrust. The chieftain was much faster, though. His spear seemed to almost teleport into the path of the glaive, positioned for an indomitable block. Something weird happened then. Master Jet's weapon suddenly turned ghostly and eerily luminous, and simply passed through the shaft of the spear, then effortlessly pierced. No, phased through the creature's armor, burying itself deep in his chest. Right where one of the soul cores should have been. What the? Things didn't go as she had planned, though. Sunny got that suspicion because of a slight frown that appeared on Jet's face, and the fact that the tyrant did not slow down even one bit. Instead of having its soul damaged or one of his cores destroyed, the bastard simply took a step forward and raised his spear, which suddenly ignited with blinding light and flooded the area directly in front of the gate with menacing red radiance. Sunny sighed. Well, that's my cue to get the hell out of here. This was not a battle he could handle, at least not in his current state. Master Jet seemed to have the situation under control. Even if she ended up as no match for the Barrow chieftain, she would at least be able to stall him until the rest of the government forces arrived. Sunny, on the other hand, would probably just be erased from existence by the destructive fallout their battle was bound to produce. Since Saint was doing fine in the gymnasium of the school, protecting both the children and the teachers, he didn't have to worry about Rain, as well. All that was left was to get more shadow fragments and, hopefully, an additional memory or two while Soul Reaper was doing the heavy lifting, of course. It's a good thing she arrived way faster than 13 minutes, though. What an exemplary employee. I am starting to understand why Master Jet always seems sleep-deprived. I hope the government gives her a raise. With that, Sunny picked himself off the ground and used Shadow Step to appear near the 6 awakened, who were on the verge of being overrun by the advancing nightmare creatures. Honestly, it was a miracle that all of them were still alive. Summoning the Odachi once again, Sunny cut down a hunter who had been aiming at the familiar young woman with a bow, and gave her a cursory glance. Something exploded behind him, in the direction where Master Jet was fighting the tyrant, painting him with shades of deep red. Lord Mongrel, what should we do? Wasn't that obvious? Run, you idiots. Grimacing behind the fearsome black mask, Sunny opened his mouth and said, his voice full of resentment toward the fact that he had to tell such an obnoxious lie. Stand and fight. The girl stared at him, a sudden expression of shame clearly written on her face. Of course. Of course. That is what an awakened ought to do. Suppressing an infuriated groan, Sunny strained his aching muscle and raised the soul serpent. What a joke. I better not see that quote going viral on the network. In the end, the gate was contained with, miraculously, no civilian casualties. Soon after Master Jet appeared, the government strike force finally arrived. Several swift air carriers descended from the skies in the howling of jet engines, and dozens of awakened jumped down, all clad in high-quality armor and wielding powerful weapons. Almost at the same time, armored vehicles appeared on the road and opened fire on the mass of nightmare creatures, their spell-tech cannons managing to obliterate the weaker abominations and herd the more powerful ones away from the city streets. Operated by mundane humans, these machines were meant to control the battlefield and make it easier for the awakened to eliminate those creatures too tough for human weapons to destroy reliably. More cohorts, machines, and mundane soldiers followed. Master Jet, unbelievably, ended up actually killing the tyrant. The break in their battle came when she suddenly shifted from attacking the chieftain himself to aiming for the three-eyed skull he wore as a helmet. As soon as she managed to crack the skull, the red flames burning in the eyes of the wraiths were extinguished, leaving them disoriented and weakened. Many simply fell to the ground, losing their perverted unlives. The tyrant staggered, and then collapsed in a heap of rotten fur and desiccated flesh, sending a tremor through the bloody battlefield. This time, he was truly and utterly dead. After that, the scales of the battle tilted drastically in the favor of humans. Noticing a dedicated team of awakened enter the school to secure the students, Sunny dismissed Saint and glanced at the scene of slaughter one last time. His heart was in agony. Not because of the havoc and destruction that seemed to envelop once peaceful streets, but because of all the soul shards and contribution points he was going to miss out on. Such cruelty, such injustice. Well, at least he received a very large number of shadow fragments, several memories, and even learned a new, profound and deviously deadly battle style. This thought did not console him very much, though. Almost on the verge of crying, Sonny sighed, and dissolved into the shadows. Without saying anything or demanding any credit, Mongrel was gone just as suddenly as he had appeared. All that was left behind were scores of dead nightmare creatures and the memories of those who saw him fight. And some time later, in a dark and empty alley, awakened Sunless, who avoided the summons to defend the gate, walked toward an especially remote corner and bent down to pick up the covetous coffer, which was furtively looking out from behind a big garbage container. Taking his communicator, Sonny patted the box on the lid and dismissed it, then stared at the screen with a dark expression. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Ah, it's good to be a coward. By the time Sonny limped back to his house, the news of the gate opening in a prestigious district of the city was all over the network. Luckily, the school Rain attended was situated really far away from where both of them lived. None of the mayhem had reached the terrace neighborhood, leaving it as quiet and peaceful as ever. It was a bit strange to see that nothing had changed here despite the fact that mere tens of minutes of riding the train away, the bodies of numerous nightmare creatures littered the ground. Life simply went on. Well, it wasn't really that surprising. If people reacted strongly to every instance of a gate appearing, nothing would ever get done, and everyone would live every day of their lives in fear. So, those not affected by the disaster directly did not allow it to disrupt their moods or routines. People could get accustomed to anything, even the constant possibility of terrifying monsters suddenly coming out of an infernal rift in reality on their street. As long as important parts of city infrastructure weren't damaged, no one was going to care that much, and even if they were, citizens knew how to adapt. Public transport would be rerouted, power outages would be dealt with by switching to autonomous generators or simply using candles, and so on. The gate was contained, the impact area was already being cleaned by the government workers. When tomorrow came, the cafe Sonny had visited would be open again, as if nothing happened. Life would return to normal, and those who had experienced the terror of the gate firsthand would go on, silently bearing an invisible scar on their heart. But that was all right, too. Collecting scars was something that everyone who lived in this world had to do as they matured. This was the reality of the nightmare spell. Why am I suddenly in a philosophical mood? Sonny shook his head, then scoffed and opened the door of his home. Effie was in the living room, taking advantage of the state-of-the-art entertainment system Sonny had bought and paid for. When she saw him, a surprised expression appeared on her face. Gods, what happened to you? Did a piano fall on your head? What a strange question. Sonny sighed, then glanced at her arcly. No. A gate fell on my head. Sort of. Damn thing opened right near a cafe I sometimes visit. They sell incredible pastries, so. Good news is, I managed to finish my pastry before getting the hell out. Effie gave him a shocked look. Goodness, you were near that mess? I heard that the government barely gave people time to evacuate this time. Sonny shrugged. Near, yes. The young woman stared at him, then grinned. So, how many contribution points did you get? Enough to upgrade the entertainment system? Maybe? You won't believe the quality of the haptic interfaces these days. I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, of course, just something to consider. He gritted his teeth and let out a frustrated sigh. None. I didn't get anything? Okay. Effie blinked a couple of times, then looked at him with a bit of disappointment. Well, no need to get emotional. There's no shame in avoiding such fights. Everyone wants to live, you know. Sonny waved a hand dejectedly, then turned around. Yeah, I know. Anyway, I'll go take a bath. Have fun, leaving his guest. Well, more like an uninvited housemate. Alone in the living room, Sonny went away and prepared an ice bath for himself. When he lowered his aching body into the cold water and endured the initial shock, a pleasant numbness enveloped him. Sonny glanced at the tapestry of bruises covering his skin, and sighed. Can I still be considered pale if I am mostly black and purple? Gee, I always wanted to stop being pasty. But not like this. He closed his eyes and relaxed, enjoying the ice bath. None of his wounds were serious enough to really worry about, so he just had to wait for his body to heal itself. That was going to take a few days, which Sonny was fully intending to spend lazing about and doing nothing. Wasn't that the dream? After a while, he got a bit bored and decided to do something productive. He could either check on how much he had gained in the bloody battle, or see if someone had come close to connecting him to Mongrel. Sonny thought for a few moments, then reached for his communicator. Let's see the extent of the damage first. A few moments later, a low groan escaped from his lips. Oh, for spell's sake. Shocking news. Mysterious online sensation Mongrel returns to single-handedly contain a Category 2 gate. In the shadow of a lord, Mongrel's heroic stand caught on camera. Who is Lord Mongrel, the courageous hero that everyone is talking about? The answer might shock you. We knew it all along. Mongrel is a woman confirmed. Stand and fight. Words to live by. Mongrel refuses to give up. Sonny stared at the screen of the communicator with resentment, then suppressed the desire to crush it in his fist. What is wrong with people? Apparently, a bit of his recent performance had been caught on tape. The shockwave of an opening gate was supposed to mess with electronics, but one camera had miraculously survived. The image was really grainy and stuttered every few seconds, but he could make out a dark figure moving through the mass of nightmare creatures, the soul serpent flashing through the bloody mist, its blade surrounded by a halo of black radiance. The battle style of the Barrow Wraiths and his need to spill as much blood as possible added an extra layer of brutality to the recording, making him seem like a demon that had escaped from some lightless hell. Sonny grimaced as if in pain, and tentatively looked down, on the views counter beneath the video. When he saw it, the communicator slipped from his hand and fell into the water. Good thing it was waterproof. Damnation. Well, you've done it now, fool. Congratulations. You've gone mainstream. Today, a terrible tragedy almost happened in a peaceful and prosperous part of the city. It was a day like any other, until a sudden notification alerted the citizens that a gate was about to open nearby. With no time to evacuate, numerous people were going to die. But then, a courageous awakened placed himself in the way of nightmare creatures, holding off the entire advancing horde by himself and refusing to give ground until the government forces arrived. This hero then disappeared without demanding any reward, not leaving even his name behind, only scores of slaughtered monsters and numerous saved lives. Who is this brave and modest savior? Where did he come from? And what is his true identity? Well, some readers might recognize him as the viral dreamscape sensation, Mongrel. Sonny stared at the communicator, which had water dripping from it, with a dark expression on his face. An official newspaper. This is a damn published article, not a random network thread. Previously, Sonny had only gone really viral among the people who were interested in the dreamscape and dueling. Even though the recording of his performance in the Coliseum reached a wider audience, most of the people who had seen it did not pay Mongrel a lot of attention, since they didn't understand the details of his achievements. This one, however, was different. Everyone could relate to a gate opening and knew how terrifying and calamitous such an event could be. So, the new video showed Mongrel in a context that revealed just how bizarre and exceptional his deeds were to everyone. Add to that the fact that the combination of the mantle of the underworld, the soul serpent, and Weaver's mask looked really striking and menacing, and that, miraculously, no civilian had died despite the late warning by the government, and Sonny found himself in a sea of trouble. Suddenly, he was happy with the fact that he had not been able to augment himself with both of his shadows. At least his physical prowess did not seem too out of the realm of humanly possible. Or rather, possible for an awakened. The other good news was that there, thankfully, was no recording of Saint. The cameras in the school had been properly damaged, and for that reason, people only knew of her by verbal description. Which caused its own share of problems because of how similar the mantle of the underworld was to her armor. Due to that and the nature of how rumors distorted the truth the more they were shared, soon, many people were convinced that Mongrel had protected the children in the school personally. And that led some to become convinced that Mongrel was a woman. Sonny tiredly covered his face with a hand. His worst fears had not come true, though. Despite the fact that the recording showed him using Shadow Step, no one learned the true nature of his ability from the grainy image, and no one connected him and Mongrel together. Maybe because of the ridiculous way A Song of Light and Darkness portrayed Sonny, but no one even tried to assume that Changing Star's bumbling sidekick was actually the dark, deadly, demonic swordsman Mongrel. Instead, there were countless discussions like this. Mongrel_Seeker, new information on Mongrel's aspect. Previously, we all thought that his ability had to do with physical enhancement or perception, right? But we were all wrong. The new video clearly shows that his aspect is actually spatial sorcery. Spirit of the Coliseum, do you realize what that means? It means that he didn't even use his aspect in the Dreamscape duels. That was all just pure skill. Crazy. Anonymous user, you mean her aspect? Mongrel_Seeker, heresy. Lord Mongrel is not a her. Anonymous user, you mean Lady Mongrel? Spirit of the Coliseum, I better ping at Mongrel's son. He should know who his dad is. Anonymous user, you mean his mom? Sonny let out an infuriated sigh. Well, at least no one is mentioning me. If you think about it, the more people think that Mongrel is a lady, the better. Yes, this is good. No, seriously. So good. Curse them all. And of course, there were a lot of nonsensical threads assigning some deep and profound meaning to every stupid lie he had said. Like, I am just a human. Mongrel reminds us of the only truth. There are no mundanes or awakened, only humans and the nightmare creatures. He knows that everyone is equal before the spell. Or, make them bleed. Wow, I have no words. So cool. How can anyone be so cool? At the end of the day, that is all that any of us can do. Repay each drop of human blood the nightmare creatures spill with a river of their own. But mostly, it was the damned idiotic advice he had given to one of the 6 awakened near the end: stand and fight. Am I the only one who got shivers after hearing that? Such simple, but all-encompassing adage. Lord Mongrel, he is a true awakened. Everywhere he looked, it was the same 3 words. So many people were repeating, praising, and adding them to their bios that Sonny wanted to vomit. What is happening? As people continued to watch the recording and discuss it, the truth got hazier and hazier. Pretty soon, everyone seemed to have forgotten that Sonny had not actually contained the gate by his lonesome self. No one mentioned Master Jet, who had literally saved his skin and took on the Guardian alone, eventually defeating the fallen tyrant without a cohort of masters supporting her. No one mentioned the 6 awakened who had helped him, and a literal army of government soldiers who had done the really heavy lifting and wiped out the entire horde, which he had only stalled until their arrival. It was all Mongrel and his courageous, selfless, heroic stand against numerous nightmare creatures, as if he was some sort of a fearless, slaughtering demigod. It's almost like no one even cares about the truth. Sonny threw the communicator on the pile of clothes and closed his eyes in frustration. It was a very strange sentiment. The irony was not lost on him one bit. Curses. Who knew that I would be lamenting a lack of truth one day? Me, of all people. What is this situation? Indeed, making Sonny care about the truth was not easy. It was no simple trick. Eventually, Sonny climbed out of the bath, dressed himself, and moved to the kitchen to make himself something to eat. After the intense gauntlet of the gate battle, he was hungry like a wolf. Ravenous, really. Cooking calmed him down a little, and the pleasant smell made his mood a bit better. Now that Sonny had some time to think, he saw the whole situation in a new light. Yes, his hope for Mongrel to be forgotten was utterly shattered. But there was a bright side to this fiasco, now that he had completely failed to keep a low profile. There was no more reason to, which meant that he could resume practicing shadow dance in the dreamscape, and hopefully master its second step before winter came. He just had to rethink how he viewed the persona of Mongrel. Initially, Sonny had planned for it to be unseen and anonymous, merely a camouflage he would put on to accomplish certain things that were inconvenient or too dangerous to be tied to his own name. Well, that ship had sailed. He was pretty sure that from now on, anything having to do with Mongrel was going to be at the center of people's attention. But that wasn't necessarily bad. There were ways to remain unseen even in the spotlight. In fact, sometimes it was easier. All magicians knew that the secret to pulling off a flawless trick was not to become invisible, but to direct the crowd's attention towards something eye-catching and away from the hand performing the switch. Sonny was not a magician, but he did consider himself to be an experienced cheat. The principle was more or less the same. So if he played his cards right, the more attention Mongrel received, the more freedom he would have to move unseen in the shadows, accomplishing his goals under everyone's noses with no one being the wiser. Maybe, such a thing was hard to accomplish and had more risk, but also promised a greater reward. So, not all was lost. Plus, he had protected Rain. That was the only thing that really mattered. Everything else paled in comparison. Sonny finished his decadently generous dinner and moved to the porch. Sitting in the shade, he relaxed, grimaced a little due to pain, and took a sip of tea. He was suddenly in a great mood. And why wouldn't he be? It was finally time to take a look at his spoils. The battle might have been hard and it almost cost him his life, but he had not fought for nothing. Summoning the runes, Sonny glanced at the familiar string of them and smiled. Shadow fragments, 1814 2000ths. Incredible. In just 10 or so minutes, Sonny had gained more shadow fragments than he usually did in weeks. From what Sonny remembered, he slaughtered almost 100 nightmare creatures in front of the gate. Granted, most of them were of the dormant rank and had not contributed any fragments to his growing cores, but still, it was a monumental accomplishment. It made him think back to the first abomination he had ever slain, the Mountain King's larva. How tense and terrifying that fight had been, how convinced he was that the perverse creature would kill him. Who would have thought that one day in a not too distant future, he would be able to slaughter 100 nightmare creatures of similar and greater power without being torn to pieces. Sonny had come so far. Lowering his gaze, he glanced at the runes describing his memories and couldn't contain a delighted grin. Oh, I was so lucky today. Without even counting the obsidian spear he had gotten and then swiftly lost to the tyrant, there were 6 new memories in his arsenal, most of them of the awakened rank. Sonny studied them for a bit and, coming to the conclusion that none were better than his current ones or performed something he wasn't already capable of, dove into the soul sea. He fed the memories to Saint and looked at her runes, satisfied with what he saw. Shadow fragments, 179 200. So close. At this rate, he would probably be able to reach the full 200 before having to go into battle with the vine creature inhabiting the wreck of the ancient ship. If Saint grew even more powerful before then, her presence was going to change a lot of things. Sonny drank his tea in the peaceful silence of the terrace district, grimacing from time to time because of the pain in his bruised body. But even the pain couldn't spoil his mood. Today was a good day. He watched Rain be brought home in a PTV, made sure that she was fine. Well, as fine as a young girl could be after experiencing a close brush with an opening gate. And went inside. He was due for some well-deserved rest. In the evening, when the sun hid behind the horizon and the street lamps were flooding the city with pale white light, Sonny was resting in his living room, doing nothing in particular. He was lazily scrolling through the pages of a popular webtoon and appreciating the twists and turns of its simple story. Crazy. Do people really think about such stuff? His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a strange sound. It took Sonny a couple of seconds to realize what it was, since he had never heard it in this house before. Someone was knocking on the door. What the hell? Who could be visiting him at this late hour? Putting the communicator away, Sonny sent his shadow to take a look and scratched the back of his head in confusion. Standing on his porch was none other than Rain, wearing her cozy home clothes and looking uncharacteristically nervous. What is she doing here? For a moment, Sonny considered pretending that he wasn't home, but then sighed and stood up. There was no point in hiding, since they literally lived almost next to each other. Walking over to the door, he lingered a second or two, made sure that none of his bruises were showing, and then opened it. Yeah? What's up? Not knowing that Sonny had already seen how nervous she was, Rain pretended to be calm and gave him a polite smile. Hey, Sonny, the food container? Mom wants it back. He stared at her for a couple of seconds. Oh. Wait here. He walked to the kitchen, retrieved the container from the dishwasher machine, and returned to the porch. Here. Tell your mom that her cooking is delicious. We really enjoyed it. Rain took the container, but didn't leave. Instead, she just stood there silently, looking at him with a tense expression. Sonny frowned. Can I? But at that exact moment, she suddenly blurted out. I know who you are. If Sonny had a drink in hand, he would undoubtedly do a spit take. What? As his heart almost stopped, he looked at Rain with a deadpan expression. Maintaining it cost him a lot, though. What does she think she knows? Well, of course you know who I am. I introduced myself when we met for the first time, didn't I? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. After a bit of an awkward pause, Rain said. No, I know that you are an awakened. Sonny blinked a couple of times, but before he could come up with something to say, she hurriedly continued. Sorry. It's just. My dad works for the government, so he knows such things. You are so young, with no parents, but are able to afford a house in this neighborhood. Plus, you don't go to a university or to work. So. You are an awakened, aren't you? Solid reasoning. He hesitated, then simply shrugged. Sure. Not like it's a big secret. Anyway, Rain remained silent for a few moments, and then asked. Are you any good? Sonny stared at her for a bit. Then, a grin slowly appeared on his face. Me? Oh. The best of the best. Probably the strongest awakened in the world. Really. No one else can even compare. A slight scowl appeared on Rain's face. I'm being serious. Are you any good or not? Sonny lingered for a moment, then sighed. Yeah, I'm alright. Why are you asking? Rain looked at him for a while, as if gathering courage. Then, she clenched her fists and blurted. Can you train me? Sonny stared at her, dumbfounded. Well, I'll be damned. That took an unexpected turn. Train her. Wasn't that exactly what he wanted? It was. But wasn't it also exactly what he wanted to avoid? Yes, it was that too. Sonny was in a strange predicament. The solution to the problem that had tormented him for many months had suddenly fallen right into his lap out of nowhere, but to make use of it, he had to do something that went against all his previous reservations. He didn't want Rain to be connected to him in any way. If Sonny was honest with himself, he had to admit that he was drawn to her. Or rather, to the faint, half-forgotten memories of a different, happy time that she represented. His desire to reconnect with Rain was both selfish and misguided, since he knew that nothing was going to bring those memories back to life. And if Sonny was really honest, he had to admit that deep down, he harbored a lot of resentment toward her, too. For having a loving family while he had none, for being fine, for not needing him at all. What a mess of emotions that was. And if there was one thing Sonny was really bad at dealing with, it was his feelings. For him, fighting hordes of nightmare creatures was much easier. And then, as if his inner turmoil was not enough, there were external forces at play, too. There was his fated attribute, the strange connection he had to Weaver, and Nephis with her murderous feud against the sovereigns and the inhuman will to see the spell destroyed. The more he and Rain were connected, the higher were the chances of her being implicated in all this. But Maybe, as long as they only had a shallow connection between a kid from an affluent family and her hired tutor, things weren't going to get out of hand. He also had to consider that the threat posed by a potential first nightmare was much greater than that of being superficially tied to him. After all, Sonny had not done anything to attract the really dangerous kind of attention. Or rather, had not been caught doing anything like that yet. While he was torn between these conflicting thoughts, Rain waited patiently, and then, misjudging his silence, said, "Oh. Of course, I will pay you. I have some money saved for a trip, and, well, I can also talk to my parents. It's just that you're the only awakened I know. You know, apart from my combat instructor in school." Sonny looked at her, a deep frown on his face. Eventually, he asked, "What brought upon this conversation? Why do you suddenly want someone to train you? You said it yourself, you already have a combat instructor. I thought you rich kids get taught everything you need in school." Rain suddenly grew quiet and looked away. After a while, she said, That. You probably haven't heard, but there was a gate that opened near my school today. Many people almost died. I saw a real nightmare creature, even. It was this close to me. Unawakened like you won't probably understand how it feels, right? Oh. Sorry, what am I saying? Of course you'd understand. I mean, what I meant to say is that I was absolutely powerless, and that was not a nice feeling. Not a nice feeling at all. He glanced at him, and said with a suddenly serious voice, "So I want to become strong. Really strong. Strong enough to never feel that way again." Sonny almost laughed. Oh, what irony. Here we are, so different and in such different situations, but our desires are completely the same. Become stronger, so much stronger. As strong as one could possibly be. Rain paused for a few moments, and then added, "And what we are taught in school is not nearly enough. At least it wasn't today. Some of my classmates have private tutors that their parents hire for them, real awakened fighters. But it's just a question of status to them. They don't really learn. Or if they do, I didn't see it make any difference when the nightmare creatures were trying to kill us." Sonny smiled from the corner of his mouth. "That's because 1,000 hours of training will never be as impactful as one real fight. My own mentor told me that once." He hesitated for a second, and then sighed. "I myself was trained by a very special person. The best fighter I have ever met, and probably ever will. The funny thing is, though, I sort of swindled her into teaching me how to handle a sword. Felt a little guilty about it ever since. So I guess it won't hurt to pay it forward and help someone like you out." Sonny looked at Rain with a dark expression, realizing that he had already made a decision. To hell with this. Why make things complicated when they are actually really simple? He shook his head. "Be warned, though, if you want me to train you, I will really train you. It's going to be hard as hell and hurt a lot. I don't want to hear any complaints, or see you slacking off. Understood?" Rain suddenly giggled. Sonny scowled. "What's so funny?" She waved a hand. Sorry. It's funny when you act all strict and serious, because you know, are barely older than me. But I do understand. I'll work hard, I promise." Sonny stared at her for a bit, then said in a low voice, "What do you mean, barely older than you? I'm ages older than you. Just half the crap I've seen would be enough for a few lifetimes of the likes of you." Then, he smiled menacingly and added, "Oh, and by the way, I also won't be cheap. I have mouths to feed, you know. That guest you've seen. I can't seem to get her to leave. There's also a stone-hearted beauty who always follows me around, and her diet is unreasonably expensive. But what can I do? Attracting women with terrifying appetites seems to be my curse." He sighed, looked at Rain, and added, "But if you still didn't change your mind, then fine. I'll train you." Rain. Somewhere far away, in the depths of an endless and inescapable nightmare, a blinding disk of an incandescent sun was bathing the dunes of a vast desert in a flood of immolating heat. The sands of the desert were flawlessly white, and the azure sky above them was deep and boundless like an ancient ocean, with not a single cloud blemishing its silken expanse. Being battered by the heat, a lone figure moved across the sand. It was a young woman with striking gray eyes, her skin covered in terrible burns, her silver hair dirty with blood and surrounded by a radiant halo of reflected light. She wore charred remains of a shattered armor, and wielded a broken sword, its silver blade fractured and ending in a jagged edge close to the hilt. The young woman walked forward, the trail of her footprints stretching far into the distance and disappearing over the horizon. To her left, there was nothing but an endless sea of white dunes. To her right, a line of black mountains eventually created a boundary for the scorching desert. Far ahead, there was a tree with scarlet leaves and a scattering of something that looked like pale fruit hanging from its wide branches. This was where Nephis was headed. She had to reach the tree before the night came, or... No, it was better not to think of it. Her water had long run out, and the thirst was slowly taking hold of her mind. Her tortured body was a sea of pain, but she could still walk. She could still fight. She was still not willing to give up. After a while, the tree grew closer. Nephis stopped and stared at its white bark, its scarlet leaves, and the shapes she had thought were fruit. But they weren't. Instead, tens of thousands of skulls hung from the beautiful branches, fastened to them with glistening threads of black silk. A spring of water formed a clear pool in the shadow of the great tree, and on its bank, with his back to her, stood a figure clad in a strange, rusted armor. A human? No. The figure was too tall to be one of her kind. As if hearing her thoughts, the creature turned around, revealing a desiccated face of a corpse, hollow eyes emanating ominous blue radiance, and 6 hands, each grasping the hilt of a weapon. 2 hands held long swords, their blades sharper than a razor and curved slightly. 2 hands held menacing twisted sickles, and the last 2 held a heavy scepter and a broken shield. The chest plate of the creature's rusted armor was shattered, revealing a harrowing wound beneath. Being consumed by thirst and exhaustion, Nephis raised a hand, as if begging the creature to stop. But, of course, it didn't. With furious madness burning in its eyes, the abomination lunged at her, striking down with one of the sickles. It moved faster than lightning, sending a scarlet cloud of fallen leaves swirling into the air with a strong gust of wind. Taking a step back, Nephis raised her broken sword to deflect the devastating strike, as if forgetting that it had no blade. At the last moment, though, a ray of pure sunlight appeared where the blade should have been and stopped the sickle from rending her flesh. Nephis swayed from the force of the impact, but remained standing. Her cracked lips opened, and a hoarse whisper escaped from them. "Let us burn, then. Let us burn together." In the next moment, white flames ignited in her eyes. Her skin suddenly shone with pure radiance, which then became brighter, and brighter. And then, brighter still. Throwing the sickle away, she dodged 2 thrusting swords and danced around the armored giant, her blade of sunlight piercing the rusted armor with terrifying ease. The 2 of them fought in the shade of the ancient tree, thousands of skulls staring at their battle with empty eyes as they swayed in the wind. Nephis was much slower and weaker than the 6-armed demon, but her skill was flawless, inexplicable, and deadly. She moved with the flow of the battle as if it was her natural element, controlling its cadence with indifferent ease. Her flesh mended itself seconds after being torn, and the flames burning in her eyes only grew hotter. Deathly pale from the harrowing pain, her beautiful face grew colder and colder, becoming almost inhuman. Her sword of sunlight, meanwhile, left molten marks on the body of the ancient demon. And even though such wounds could never harm it, after a while, the creature suddenly staggered. Of course, it did. That was a memory left behind by the nameless son of the forgotten shore. After all, everything it touched was doomed to have its soul destroyed. Finally, Nephis managed to find an opening and dashed forward, slashing upward with the nameless sun. The sunlight blade cut through the rusted armor and severed one of the demon's arms, then fell down and sliced through another. Before the creature could recover, she was already upon it. Nephis sidestepped a crushing blow of the heavy scepter and places her hand on the demon's face. The creature froze, and then opened its mouth, as if to scream. However, all that escaped from it were dancing tongues of white flame. As the pure radiance enveloping Neph's skin dimmed, it was as though the demon burned from within. Flaming fissures opened on its body, leaking pristine fire and radiating annihilating heat. His flesh boiled and blacked, and eventually, the blue shine of his eyes was replaced with blinding white light. And then, that light was extinguished, leaving 2 dark, charred holes behind. Nephis let go of the creature's face, and watched as its scorched body fell to the ground. She stared at it for a few moments, and then indifferently turned away. Making a few steps forward, Nephis swayed and fell to her knees. Then, she reached into the pool with trembling hands, put her palms together, and brought a handful of cold, sweet water to her lips. Finally, her terrible thirst could be quenched. After drinking her fill, Nephis sat silently on the edge of the pool for a while, staring into the distance. Her eyes, however, were moving, as if reading an invisible book that floated in the air above the calm waters. Some time later, a pale shadow of a smile touched her lips. "That guy. He did something crazy again, didn't he?" She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. "How is he so fast? In the past months? Years? Lifetimes?" Spent traversing the dream realm, surrounded by nothing except for pain and bloodshed, Nephis had started doubting the memories of her previous life. Sometimes, all of it seemed like something that she had simply imagined. A bittersweet dream she had invented to escape from the horrors of the real world. This world, the world of never-ending nightmares. The change of the runes describing Sunny was the only connection she had left to the actual reality. Perhaps, it was the only thing keeping her sane. Even if the things she saw in the shimmering runes were sometimes hard to believe. The impossible lineage that should not have existed, the divine memory of the 7th rank, the strange essence of his soul, the true nature of the taciturn stone demon. And of course, of his flaw. It seemed that Sunny had much more secrets than Nephis had suspected. With that knowledge, many things made much more sense now. But at the same time, many others seemed much more incredible. Well, it was not like she didn't have secrets of her own. And anyway, it was all in the past. Everything was in the past. All that remained was the future. She did hope that he was doing well, though, out there in the real world. With Cassie. Looking up from the water, Nephis shifted her gaze to the ancient tree and saw two weathered skeletons cruelly nailed to its white bark. Both stared at her with empty eyes, their teeth bared in eternal grins. After some time, one of the skeletons said, "My, oh my, am I that pleasant to look at?" The other grated its teeth and let out a creaky growl, then strained, trying to wrestle free of the large silver nails impaling it to the tree. However, no matter how furiously it struggled, the nails held true. Nephis looked at the skeletons with a calm expression, no emotion reflecting in her cold, gray eyes. The first skeleton spoke again. Is that living blood I smell? Gods! What terrible sins have you committed, girl, to be cast into this hell alive? Even for a revolting Nephilim like you, this is too harsh of a punishment. Finally, she opened her mouth and said hoarsely, in a voice of a person who had almost forgotten how to speak, "What language do you use?" The skeleton laughed. "The only language there is in this place, of course. Why? Do you wish to learn it?" Nephis remained silent for a long time, and then said, "I seek a way back to the waking world. Do you know how to escape this place?" The skeleton stared at her with a grin. "The waking world? What is that?" The second skeleton suddenly spoke, his voice deep and full of rage. "Can't you smell the stench of a demon on this abominable thing? She is one of Weaver's, you fool." The first skeleton turned its skull a little, and then asked, "Is that so? My, oh my. In that case, you will not find guides better than the two of us. Just take us off this damn tree, and we will lead you to wherever you want." Nephis stared at them for a while, then turned away. "I don't need two guides. Which one should I pick?" The second skeleton strained to free himself again, and then roared. "I am Azarax the Mighty, the Plague of Steel, King of Kings, Conqueror of 100 Thrones. Choose me, Nephilim. I will guide you to the shores of the underworld and through its dark expanse, back to the world of the living. You will need a powerful guide if you wish to escape." She spared him a glance, then said to the other one, "What about you?" The first skeleton answered in an aloof tone. "Me? Oh, I am no one, just a humble slave." Nephis lingered for a bit. Finally, she asked, "Why are the two of you nailed to this tree?" The skeleton who had called himself Azarax growled. "Don't you know where you are, abominable creature? I am here because I led my armies into the Great War, slaughtered a myriad of souls, and was punished for my strength and my pride." She shifted her gaze to the other one. The first skeleton answered succinctly, "I have angered the gods." Nephis tilted her head a little. "How?" The skeleton sighed with regret. "Well, if you must know, I slit a god's throat. My, oh my. One could say that it was a misunderstanding. Was there really a need to be so petty?" The sun was already falling behind the horizon, and chilling cold was spreading across the white desert. Nephis summoned her white cloak and wrapped herself in it, shivering. Soon, night descended upon the world, revealing a myriad of bright stars. As it did, the sand moved, and slowly, countless figures rose from beneath it. All of them were corpses with no flesh remaining of their perfectly black bones, some of creatures that resembled humans, some of towering giants, and some of beings who were too strange and terrifying to describe. In a clamor of rusted armor and a litany of howls, the hordes of abominations clashed against each other, continuing their terrible battle even in death. Nephis moved closer to the tree, which somehow remained an isle of calm in the sea of terror, and looked at the first skeleton. "You remind me of someone I knew. Come morning, I will take you off the tree. To guide me though." The skeleton cackled. "Very well, vile creature. Even though you are revolting, I will keep my promise." Nephis grinned. "What do I call you, then?" The skeleton remained silent for a bit. "A name? I used to have one of those, before. What was it?" "Oh." He moved its jaw a little, and then said, Uriz. Uriz of the Nine.